We begin with the fight for democracy in Washington, D.C., where protesters flooded the streets to rally against President Trump's federal police takeover. In a major escalation, Republican governors of 3 states, West Virginia, Ohio, and South Carolina, are set to deploy hundreds of National Guard troops to Washington. And in a reversal of their previous stance, defense officials now say many of those troops will be armed. But the backlash to Donald Trump's extreme agenda is spreading far beyond the nation's capital. Across the country, Americans are rallying against what they see as a sweeping power grab by Texas Republicans, a gerrymandering plan designed to lock in Republican control of the House of Representatives in the 2026 midterm elections. Yesterday, the Democratic National Committee organized hundreds of Fight the Trump Takeover protests in 43 states, according to the event website. The largest demonstrations were in Texas itself and simultaneous rallies in Chicago and Austin. Democrats vowed to use every tool at their disposal to keep up the pressure on Texas Republicans.
Together, we shined a national spotlight on this power grab. Together, we sparked national momentum for California and other states to redistrict and cancel out the 5 stolen seats out of Texas. This is a bipartisan movement with one simple message. Voters should choose their politicians, not the other way around.
And we are going to continue to fight, to raise, to organize, to register, to mobilize. We will fight on the floor of this House. We will fight in the courtroom. We will fight in the streets. Whatever the maps are, we are going to win them in this state.
Joining us now, Ahmed Baba, columnist for The Independent and founder of Ahmed Baba News, and Miles Taylor, former DHS chief of staff during Donald Trump's first term and author of Blowback. Gentlemen, welcome to the weekend. Miles, as I said in the intro, defense officials had initially said that the National Guard troops would not be armed. And now we hear, according to a Trump official, not only will more states supposedly deploy troops to the nation's capital, but they're going to be armed. How far do you see this federal takeover of Washington going?
Yeah, I think they're going to go all the way, Jonathan. I mean, we should
define all the way, Miles.
Yeah. Well, I think that they ultimately want those troops to be the ones who are responsible for law enforcement in Washington, D.C. I think that's what the president wants, because in his view, his chain of command as commander in chief is a lot clearer than what the law says when it comes to home rule in Washington, D.C. and micromanaging the Washington police force. And you're already seeing that in those legal filings where Attorney General Pam Bondi is trying to demonstrate that the administration should have the ability to just fully run that police force. And of course, we've got that skepticism from the judge. There's a temporary arrangement there. So there's already frustration with the administration that they're not going to be able to do what they want with the DC police force. What Trump knows, what his White House knows, what his attorney general knows is that U.S. troops, on the other hand, under his command, he can say and do whatever he wants. That's their perspective. And so I think by arming them, they're taking that additional step to saying, we're eventually going to prove out the model here for why we won't need the local police forces to do the things we want to do. And keep in mind here, the D.C. law, the law about home rule in Washington, D.C., that allows them to take over the D.C. police force for a period of time is only one of the ways the president of the United States can use emergency powers to try to enhance command and control and increase security on the ground. So, I would be aware in the coming days and weeks of other powers that the president might try to invoke to continue that presence, to expand that presence. And I'll give you an example is, down at the southern border, when we used to have National Guard troops down there, often they were not armed either. They were there in a support mission. And that's how this started off, which is usually the turnkey way you bring in the National Guard is a support mission to go help with other functions that the gun-carrying law enforcement need to be freed up from. And instead, by arming them, they're showing that they eventually intend for these these National Guard troops to be the ones enforcing the law on the ground. Now, that's not certain yet, but that's where I think this is headed.
One of the things that this reminds me of, especially, is Los Angeles, right? This is not the test case, right? We have seen this already before, and those National Guard troops had to be trained on how to deal with the population that was there, right? Because that's not exactly what they're, and the military folks, that's not exactly what they're trained for. I'm a military brat, I know this. But I also want to play congressional Republicans going after other democratically run cities, because this is clearly a trend and it seems purposeful. Let's listen.
What's happening in D.C., this is easy. President Trump is showing bold and strong leadership.
Hopefully, this is a harbinger of what we see in these liberally run cities across the country. We need to send in the troops, which is exactly what we're doing.
We're going to support doing this in other cities if it works out in Washington, D.C. I think that this is an experiment that's probably needed in a lot of the Democrat-run cities in America.
An experiment that's probably needed in a lot of Democrat-run cities in America. I mean, I remember when Republicans were the party of states' rights, right? DC's a little different, ain't no state. But the other cities that they're talking about, those are in states where there are governors, where there are laws and how those governors are able to handle what's going on in their cities. That doesn't seem to be the case. What happened to states' rights? Where's that at?
I mean, the Republican Party isn't necessarily known for ideological consistency here, right?
Oh,
they
what do you
mean? I know that's...
Well, at least not anymore.
Not anymore. But yeah, I mean, the interesting part of this is that this is clearly not about crime, right? Because if you look at Axios just did a study, right? 13 of the 20 U.S. cities with the highest homicide rates are in Republican states. And guess who isn't naming those Republican states? Donald, right? There's three things that these states have in common, these cities, right? Blue cities, blue states, black mayor. It's like they ran it through a chat GPT prompt. It was like, give me back the states, the cities that have these parameters, right? Because as we see, D.C. has a declining, violent crime rate, 30-year low, 26% down from this time last year to right now, right? And obviously with these National Guard troops and generally, it's illegal for them to do any civilian law enforcement, right, under the Posse Comitatus Act, right? So he's pushing the envelope here on that front, as Miles has outlined. But generally, it's authoritarian spectacle because he feels weak right now. And I really think that's important to frame. This man has a 37% approval rating in the latest Gallup, right? And this is 3 points away from his post-January 6th low of 34%. So Donald Trump is 3 points away from being at his absolute political low. Right? So that's the context from which this is happening. He's doing this authoritarian spectacle to deflect from his mounting scandals, to deflect from his weakening.
And the party's backing him.
And the party is backing him because they think they can make up for those losses through the gerrymandering.
Well, Miles, that gets to, my hobby horse here, especially when Donald Trump's approval ratings are mentioned. To Ahmed's point, Donald Trump is weak right now in the overall polls. But as you and I both know, Donald Trump couldn't care less about his standing in the overall polls. What he most cares about is his standing among Republicans, and especially his standing among MAGA Republicans. And last I saw, he is in the high 80s, low 90s still. Isn't that something we should keep in mind when we see him do things that, might seem extrajudicial, outside the bounds of the Constitution, dare say unlawful?
That's absolutely right. And in fact, if you go back 10 years, Donald Trump most frequently talks about those numbers that you mentioned, Jonathan. He would talk about the numbers of his approval in the Republican Party. And I can remember this in meetings and conversations with him, is he would talk about being more popular than Abraham Lincoln and Ronald Reagan. Now, keep in mind, there were not public opinion polls during the time of Abraham Lincoln in the same way we have today. Yet Donald Trump still felt like his high 80s, low 90% approval in the Republican Party meant he was more popular than Lincoln and Reagan, and he used that comparison all the time. That's what he's paying attention to. That's also what he's going to be paying attention to when he decides whether or not this is a popular policy to deploy U.S. troops in American cities. And as you guys just saw with that montage, his core lieutenants out there in Congress and the administration are loving this. This is exactly what they want to see, and that's why I worry. mean, Ahmed's right to note that the Pace Comitatus Act prevents these National Guard troops from enforcing domestic law, from going and arresting civilians, but not if Donald Trump goes and invokes something like the Insurrection Act. And this is on their dance card. I mean, listen to me here. The president wants to invoke the Insurrection Act. I stood in the room as he directed us years ago to invoke the Insurrection Act to give him the ability to use the U.S. military on U.S. soil for civilian law enforcement. We pushed back. We worked with the lawyers. We got Donald Trump to stay down. But this is a compulsive thought in his mind. So that's what we need to be prepared for. I'm not saying it's inevitable. I'm saying I think it's quite likely that he ends up doing that, and we end up seeing this troop presence in U.S. cities be more than just a symbol.